A series on understanding Putin and the war in Ukraine. Last time, we discussed how the Kursk disaster created a media crisis that sent Putin's approval ratings into a nosedive. But for the newly inaugurated Putin, this was more than just a public relations problem. The oligarchs who controlled the media were using this national tragedy to try and drag him and his political career into the abyss. He's had countless strategic successes in his 2+ decades in power, but his complete defeat of the old oligarchs, seizing state power back from this group of shadow rulers, was without a doubt the foundational battle that cemented his authority. But here's the historical irony. The very men Putin would eventually put on trial, drive out of Russia, or even have killed, were not originally his enemies. In fact, they were the kingmakers who put him in power. So why did Putin turn so ruthlessly on his former political allies? To solve this puzzle, we must turn the clock back to that chaotic era. The birth of Russia's oligarch class is the true starting point of Putin's war for power. As the soul of modern Russia, Putin's story is a long journey. Staring at a screen for too long can strain your eyes. Why not try a different way? Turn off the screen and let your ears take in the story. Click on the soda music icon in the bottom left corner of the video to switch to audio-only mode. The story will continue to play even after you lock your screen, and you can set a sleep timer for extra convenience. Listen to the war between Putin and the oligarchs all in one go. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet red flag was slowly lowered from the spires of the Kremlin. A vast empire had collapsed. But for a small group of perceptive and audacious individuals, the collapse of the Soviet Union was an unprecedented feast. The Soviet collapse left behind not just a geopolitical vacuum, but also a massive economic inheritance, valued in the trillions of dollars. From the oil fields of Siberia and the steel mills of the Urals, to the nickel mines of the Arctic and heavy industrial enterprises across the country, how this inheritance was handled would determine the fate of the new Russia. Strictly speaking, this inheritance belonged to all Russian people. But through a series of schemes, Boris Yeltsin's government transferred it into private hands. First, the shock therapy, championed by economist Yegor Gaidar. The instant prices were deregulated, catastrophic hyperinflation followed. The life savings of ordinary Russians turned to worthless paper in a matter of months. With the public's wealth wiped out, another key figure, Anatoly Chubais, stepped in. In theory, every Russian citizen was entitled to a piece of the Soviet inheritance. So, Chubais launched voucher privatization. Every citizen received a voucher with a face value of 10,000 rubles, meant to make them a shareholder in the nation's wealth. However, in a chaotic time of uncertainty and instability, many Russians had no faith in the future of the country.
Widespread poverty where cash was king, most people, even if they understood the voucher's potential value, had to sell it immediately for food and basic necessities to avoid starvation. This 1-2 punch created the perfect conditions for the rise of the first group of smart ones. They quietly bought up massive quantities of these vouchers, completing the first round of harvesting the Soviet Union's wealth. But that was just the appetizer. By 1995, the Russian government was on the brink of bankruptcy, and Yeltsin's approval ratings were in the single digits. To avoid losing the upcoming election, Yeltsin's man, Chubais, invited a group of emerging private bankers, those same smart ones, to provide loans to the state. In return, Yeltsin offered up the state's most valuable companies as collateral. But collateral was just a euphemism. The government never intended to repay the loans. The whole thing was essentially a fire sale. Through this loans for shares scheme, future oligarch Mikhail Khodorkovsky gained control of the Yukos oil company, then valued at over $5 billion, for a mere $309 million. Boris Berezovsky snapped up Sibneft oil for just $100 million. Banker Vladimir Putin acquired Norilsk Nickel, the world's largest producer of nickel and palladium, for next to nothing. In just a few short years, this group of men, at a trivial cost, had seized the wealth accumulated over more than half a century of Soviet rule. A new class, known as the oligarchs, was born. The Russian people knew what was happening. The oligarchs were the real thieves of the nation. Yeltsin's main rival, Communist Party leader Gennady Zyuganov, was gaining support by capitalizing on the public's outrage. His platform explicitly called for a review of the privatization results. Facing a common existential threat, the oligarchs quickly formed a political alliance. In early 1996, during the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, 7 of the top oligarchs, Boris Berezovsky, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Vladimir Gusinsky, Vladimir Putin, Mikhail Fridman, Pyotr Avin, and Alexander Smolensky, formed a pact to defend their interests. With their overwhelming media and financial power, they managed to turn the tide of the 1996 election, securing Yeltsin's re-election. This victory marked the absolute peak of the oligarchs' power in Russia. For the next few years, they enjoyed not only unshakable economic status, but also a direct line to the Kremlin. They could influence the appointment of prime ministers and key cabinet members and participate in the creation of national economic policy. In the late 1990s, Russia was, in essence, a state run by oligarchs. While Yeltsin may have been a willing puppet, he couldn't be president forever. By 1999, his health was rapidly deteriorating. Finding a reliable successor became the top priority for the Kremlin, especially for Yeltsin's inner family circle and the oligarchs. They needed a guardian, someone who would guarantee the existing power structure and protect the vast fortunes they had amassed from being clawed back. While Yeltsin was the key figure in Putin's rise, the oligarchs' support was just as indispensable. During Putin's year-long journey from prime minister to president, the oligarchs reactivated their powerful 1996 political machine. During the Second Chechen War, their media empires, particularly Berezovic's ORT television network, relentlessly crafted Putin's image as a decisive, iron-fisted leader who could restore order. His tough guy quote about hunting down terrorists in the toilet was broadcast across Russia and the world thanks to the oligarchs' almost fanatical promotion. On December 31, 1999, Putin became acting president. In this carefully orchestrated transfer of power, oligarchs like Berezovic believed they had acted as kingmakers and that their business empires were now secure. They never imagined that this quiet former KGB officer had no intention of being a puppet. After taking office, Putin began to deliver on his campaign promise to restore the power vertical, a move that directly threatened the oligarch status as a power unto themselves. The honeymoon period ended in less than 3 months. The sinking of the Kursk nuclear submarine became the oligarchs' first all-out assault on Putin. Vladimir Gusinsky's NTV launched a sharp and sustained critique of the government's rescue efforts. They broadcast live footage of grieving family members angrily confronting Putin, implicitly painting him as cold and heartless. Boris Berezovic's media outlets quietly joined the attack, with his anchors questioning why Putin had remained on vacation and hinting that the real reason for refusing Western aid was to cover up the truth. Putin knew this wasn't simple media oversight. The fact that he intended to rein in the oligarchs was already an open secret. This media storm was their first open political challenge, using their most powerful weapon, their capital, to try and force Putin back onto the puppet's track. In their minds, they were entitled to this power as the kingmakers. In Putin's mind, if they were going to reject his authority and confront him head-on, he owed them no political loyalty. In fact, even before the Kursk disaster, Putin had already sent a clear warning. On July 28, 2000, he invited 21 of Russia's top business magnates, including Khodorkovsky, Berezovic, Potanin, and Friedman, to a high-stakes meeting at the Kremlin. This meeting was a showdown, Putin's version of making them an offer they couldn't refuse.
After the oligarchs had assembled, Putin delivered a short but heavy speech. He acknowledged their special role in the 90s privatization, implicitly promising not to question the origins of their wealth. But there was a condition. He stated clearly that his government would not re-examine the results of privatization and they could keep their business empires. In exchange, they must stay out of politics. The message had two layers. The surface meaning was clear. I know who you are and what you did. Stop interfering in politics. Stop funding political parties. Stop using the media to influence state decisions. Stop acting like a shadow government. But the deeper meaning was an ultimatum. This is a red line you cannot cross. If you refuse, your role as kingmakers will count for nothing, and my government will consider you enemies. Some of the oligarchs refused to accept this new deal. The media firestorm over the Kursk was in essence their declaration of war. And so for Putin, the oligarchs had become the greatest obstacle on his path to power. A purge was about to begin.